Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be talking about the Comet fit. It's basically a copy of the Inyo for the long kiting railgun setup. Now somehow I lost my old fit. I know that I flew a Comet with this fit, but I must have just fitted it in game and didn't do anything with the EFT. So right now I'm trying to figure out what the best way to run this is. So far I've pretty much copied it exactly across the board, except for the fact that I have 2 railguns instead of 4. And that's because there's a bonus 20% per level to damage, so it basically, that's a 100% bonus. It's as if I have 4 railguns. Still my DPS is less, even though the Comet has 3 deployable drones with 3 extras that you can deploy as well. You can use hobgoblins, warriors, acolytes, whatever you favor. But so if you look at the ship's comparisons, let's just compare them a little bit more before I go to the next part that I mainly wanted to show you. The hit points, 5,000 versus 7,300, 7,500. DPS output 205. It's better than the cap Inyo, the one that's better on capacitor, but not as good as this one. However, when you overload, you can see that the overload profile on the Comet, or the overload time, is far better because it only has 2 guns, which you see this across all of the faction or navy frigates. Because they have less guns, you can overload them for much longer. Look at that, it's 2 minutes. So you can pretty much always overload your guns and have no trouble whatsoever. That's pretty cool. So that kind of makes up for some of the limitation there. Other things you could look at is maybe in this high slot you could put a Newt or a Nas. I don't know. We'll look at that in just a second. So right now what I want to see is, you can see I've tried to extend the range here because the range on the Inyo is considerably better. And the reason for that is because it gets a bonus. It gets a 10% per level assault frigates optimal range bonus, so 50% bonus to optimal range. That's very helpful, so you only have to use 1 locus rig to get it out to that distance. Now, most of the time, our sweet spot is going to be 17 or 18K that we're going to be fighting at. So what I want to do is I want to add an attacker, the Comet. And I'm going to add a target. Let's call it the Slicer. Let's give it some transversal velocity. Not that much. Something like that. Because really, he's going to be trying to kite you, but you're going to be trying to kite him. So against a Slicer, you're most likely going to be using Keep At. And that's going to take away some of his transversal. Our range is going to be roughly 18, I think, so a fair spot. So you can see right now we're at 224. What happens if I go in here and do this? Where is it? So I can't get both. Dang. Because if I could get both, that would be pretty sweet. So no, I don't think that's going to work. I was hoping maybe I could do something like that and that, but that doesn't work unless I drop this one. This is a Tech 2. If I drop that one down to Tech 1. And you see we're nowhere near where we were before. One thing we could try to do to bring that back, since we've lost some range, is to go to a different ammo type. So let's drop it to thorium. And we're at 212. Huh. But we're still way over, aren't we? Dang. So that's a collision. We need a locus. Alright, so that's good on that, but we're at 207. So I think, let's go back to the antimatter. This is just how I figure things out in EFT to try to figure out what's the best. Go back to plutonium. And you can see one of these isn't Tech 2, so let's bring it up to Tech 2. Quite frankly, I could bring 2 up to Tech 2. Now we're at 220. I wonder why that happened. I was at 224 before. Why is the Tech 1 giving me more DPS than the Tech 2? Alright, that's 228, not 220. It looks like a 0 because it's on the line, but that's 228. Alright, so this is better. Another thing to try is what happens if we go to antimatter. You got to run all these hypotheticals. Okay, you see we dropped quite a bit. Our peak is much higher, and it looks higher here, but it's not really, because most of our fighting is going to be done right around there. So plutonium, 228. That's pretty good. So that's basically the fit for the Comet. And the difference is, let me drop that transverse a little bit. Now we got 230. The difference between these ships is there's actually a lot more difference than I talked about. Let's go over it again. Hit points. The Inyo is obviously going to be the stronger ship on hit points. Damage output. This one is much higher in damage, but when you factor in the overload, it's not that big of a deal, and the fact that the drones are going to be a little bit more useful. So in that case, the DPS isn't such a big deal. The hit points, ideally you don't want to be taking any damage at all, and what lends itself to preventing you from ever taking any damage through the course of the fight is the fact that you are much faster, 3,639 instead of 2,400, and much more agile. You've got 4.3 instead of 6.1. So your agility is approaching that of an interceptor, so is your speed. That basically means that there's not much out there that's going to be able to run you down. Like even the slicer. You're faster than him, and you're not quite as agile, but close. So you can see that other than capacitor, if you compare these two ships, the Fed Navy Comet and the Slicer, you can see that the Comet has more hit points, much more DPS output, although we need to overload these to give it a fair comparison, but still quite a bit more DPS output, and a little bit better speed, similar agility. Lock range, about the same, not quite as good. Lock time, not quite as good. But overall, it's a very comparable ship, and given a fight between these two, almost certainly the Comet would win. However, if you were to see a Comet in faction warfare, you're going to suspect two things, just like the Inyo, because that there's two prevalent Comet fits out there. There's the blaster fit that's basically like a Tyrannus. It's a Tyrannus on a Comet hull, and that's basically all it is. It's just a Tyrannus fit with blasters and sometimes dual prop or just a micro warp drive scram web. Or more common in faction warfare would be something like this one, which I've had a lot of luck with, is an afterburner scram kite. So in this case, this one here would be something that would try to keep its target at about 7 kilometers webbed and scrammed, overload the afterburner, overload the guns, and just nuke the target at 7K, while the target, ideally your target in this ship would have been blaster ships like a blaster Comet or a blaster Inyo. For example, before I thought of this Inyo idea, like prior to thinking of this fit, had I seen, when I was flying this, I flew this ship a lot, this Fed Navy Comet here with the afterburner. Had I seen an Inyo in a sight, I would have just jumped on the opportunity, rushed in there as fast as I could, because I knew this ship would beat a blaster Inyo, simply because I could stay out of his blaster range. I could do similar DPS, or close to the same amount of DPS, but mostly I could avoid almost all of his damage by staying out at 7, 8 kilometers. Much less if I had links, I could stay out at about 9 kilometers pretty easily. So it's just an evolution of, I guess they call it the meta, where it was finding a counter to blaster ships, which was scram kites and long kites like the Slicer, And now it's more of finding a counter to scram kites and long kites, which to me is a better long kite. And I'm calling it a long kite. I don't know if there actually is a term for a full kite versus a scram kite or a normal kite. I don't know, but we'll call it a long kite. So this counters this. This is the long kite. It also counters the condor, the breacher, some people kite with imicuses. It counters all of those fairly well. Let's close that down. The tracking on the guns here is the same as the tracking on the guns here because they both get a 7.5% per level tracking's bonus. Your tracking's just fine. But that's the basic idea behind these fits. Not this one. But all three of these fits, the basic idea is that we want to be the king at our range. Our range is roughly 15 to 20 kilometers. And that's what these ships do. They're the king at that range. Now the reasons you may want to use the Comet over the Inyo are, well, for one, let me say the Inyo has better misdirection. You're going to trick people more often in the Inyo, but you're still going to trick people in the Comet. And that misdirection is what gets you fights. Because oftentimes it's really hard to get a fight. You know, if I take a worm and I go sit inside a plex, I'm not going to get any fights. Not a plex, a site. I used to call them plexes. If you sit inside of a site and you're in the worm, people are going to see the worm. They're going to say, I'm not going to fight a worm. I'm not stupid. Certainly not in a frigate, right? Because the worm is pretty much going to annihilate most everything that comes after it if it's well fit, well piloted. So you don't want to be in the best ship. You want to be in the ship that's going to get the most kills. And more often than not, the ship that's going to get the most kills is the ship that takes people by surprise, which is what this fit does. It takes people by surprise. You're going to get a little bit more surprise factor out of the Inyo. You're going to get more DPS out of the cap-hungry Inyo, which, to be honest, you got to nuke your target in about 45 seconds or less. Otherwise, you're in trouble. Or you can go with this fit, it's a little bit cap. Since I use this cap-hungry fit, I think, more often, because most of the time you're going to kill the target fast enough that it doesn't matter. However, for those long fights, like you'll see, I think in the wolf video where I fight the wolf, this fit over here would have been much better. Overall, though, if I had to choose any of these, I think if I was trying to learn PvP, the Comet's the one I would go with at first. I would play with the Inyo here and there, maybe every 5th ship, but for the most part, I would put my time into the Comet at first because the Comet's dirt cheap. I don't even know what they cost anymore. I think that they're down around 10 million ISK or something. I'm not sure. I haven't looked in a long time. But I know they're under 20 million. And whereas the Inyo is going to be 26 million, 24, something like that, plus all the fittings. You got an internal force field array on this one to make it work. They both have Tech 2 rigs, which so does this one. But just off the top of my head, the Comet's going to cost you 20, 30 million. The Inyo is going to cost you probably 40-ish million. And over here, maybe even 50 million. So it's going to be a lot cheaper ship for the Fed Navy Comet. And another really huge bonus to the Comet over the Inyo is that the Comet can get into novice sites, whereas the Inyo can't. The Inyo has to stick to the smalls. So with the Comet, you can actually rule out bigger ships, destroyers, Tech 2 frigates, and you can get into sites, and you can be more of the king of those sites, and knowing that you can take most ships that come into them. So the Comet's a great ship. You can keep it going for a minute 45. You know, if you have to overload your web, it's going to be a little bit less. And obviously overloading your guns takes up a little bit more capacitor, but for the extra damage, it's usually worth it. And you don't have to always run your micro warp drive. Keep that in mind, that there's going to be opportunities where people are going to give up. They're going to run out of capacitor, one thing or another, and they're going to just stop. And in those times, you can turn off your micro warp drive and just monitor their velocity and range and see, you know, and then if needed, turn it back on. One last thing before I shut this down and end this fitting video is there's a considerable amount of CPU and power grid left on this fit. I can't fit any kind of weaponry, but what I could fit is a newt. Now, that neutralizer is there because it can be, pretty much. There's no other reason for it, but because it can be. But you should not run it ever. The only time you run that neutralizer is when someone gets a scram on you, and then you turn on your neutralizer and you use that as a way to counter them, to turn off their point, to turn off their web, turn off their afterburner, turn off their guns potentially. It's as a defensive mechanism. You could also use it, let's say you were trying to kill a kiting interceptor, like say an Ares or Malediction or something like that. You could actually charge them down, web them, long point them, and newt them, and get on top of them and hold them long enough for you to pretty much nuke them. And that's a good way to go. For that, if I was going in close on a target to nuke it really quick, I would switch to antimatter ammo, and I would approach at first until I got them tied down, and then I would right click their ship and do like keep at 2,500, because the more distance you have from them, the better you're going to track. So you want to be at a distance that's far enough to allow your guns a little bit of tracking, but at the same time close enough to where you don't risk them getting outside of your newt range or your web range. So this is a pretty awesome ship right here. And as a matter of fact, I haven't flown it so long, and I haven't really looked at it in EFT ever, I guess, because I don't have the fit here. I either lost it or I never fit it in EFT. But this looks like a pretty awesome ship. I might go fly this some more tonight and see if I can get some more videos with it. But they're both really good ships for faction warfare, and I think they will both work well for you. Start with the Comet, get the hang of it, and then as you go, you can try out the Inyo and see what you think. The primary upsides to the Inyo are misdirection and higher firepower, but the Comet overall might be the better ship. Hey guys, in this video you're going to watch me flying the Comet. This Comet's very similar to the Inyo in the Inyo guide, the Rail Inyo guide, but I only have this one video for the Comet. However, I didn't want the lack of video footage to stop me from getting this guide out to you guys, which it often does. I tend to build up way too much, like 5-6 hours of footage before I release anything, because I never feel like it's enough, and I have a little bit of a perfectionist deal going on. So even though it's just one video and it's not an amazing video, I want to get it out there so that you can start taking advantage of this fitting and this ship and the tactics used with it. I like the Comet over the Inyo for a couple reasons. One, it's cheaper. Two, the capacitor's a little bit more friendly. Three, it's got drones. That's nice. And finally, because it's faster. And you see me talk about that in the fitting video. But it's a nice ship. The only thing that I'd say it lacks on the Inyo really is misdirection. A Rail Comet is not quite as rare as a Rail Inyo. So with that, let's just get started and let's watch this video. As you can see, I'm here in Aboon, Faction Warfare Low-Sec, and I'm about to warp to a small outpost where I have scanned down, start the video, where I've scanned down a Firetail and a Tristan. Now you can see I've scanned them down to 15 degrees, and then I went back to to 360 so I could see what was around me. So, you know, I don't know what's in that site. I don't know if they're together. I'm going to have to fight them both, or if they're fighting each other. Until right now, it looks like there's a capsule inside. So there was a fight. That fight's over. The Tristan won the fight. Okay. So I'm going into this. Tristans can be fit all different ways. Sometimes they're kites. Sometimes they're brawlers. They can do both of those jobs quite well. I land in the site. He's 30k from me. Again, I use keep at. I'm not going to talk about that anymore because I've said it enough times. Should have hit orbit. So I start to charge in. This guy immediately shifts to a kiting orbit. He's trying to kite me and stay at an orbit. You can see he is already trying to move around me. His velocity is about the same as mine. I'm a little bit faster than him, so I am closing on him, but I'm not yet in point range because my point range is overloaded, 24 kilometers overloaded. So I've already showed him that I can hit him at range, which was probably a mistake. I should have waited until I had a point to show him that I could hit him at range and hurt him, because the moment I started doing that, I think he flipped out, and you can see his velocity has increased quite a bit, and now he's actually leaving me behind, and I'm going to lose the point. So I was a little bit too eager to show him my firepower, and you see he's got drones on me that are doing some damage, so he can go away and go out to distance and get out of my range and let his drones continue to chew on me. It's no big threat. So what I did right there is I looked at his ship. The reason I do that sometimes is so I can see what they're doing. I'll see if he turns around. I'll see if he starts to align to something, that kind of thing. So by looking at your enemy ship, sometimes you can get a little bit of advanced notice on what they're about to do next. You'll see them align, or sometimes if you can actually use it to bounce someone into range. So let's say he was a Garmer or something and he was out at that range. I could then basically turn around and run away from him, watch and wait for him to turn to come back towards me, and as soon as he comes towards me, then I hit approach and overload my micro warp drive and try to charge in for a web or something like that, or just to get in range long enough to put some good DPS on him. So what you're seeing right now is I'm just starting to overload my my micro warp drive, and I actually want to go back. I want to go back a little bit. So I want to check and see something. Okay, I haven't, or have I? Did I change ammo? No, I haven't changed ammo, I don't think. No. Alright, so back where we were. So I've just started my overload, and I should have been overloading much earlier in this fight. That's a problem I made. I should have noticed that. You can see right here he is overloaded. He's going 4,600. When I came in, he was doing like 3,200 or something like that. He is very clearly overloading, and I'm not zoomed in enough on his ship right now to see which way he's facing, but there's a good chance that he's overloading and aligning out to warp. So you can see I've noticed that I've stopped doing DPS. So what I just did there is, if he's going to keep me at 45 and I'm not going to be able to catch him overloaded, like right now I'm faster than him, but you can still see I've only got a radial velocity of negative 41. So it's going to take me quite a while to catch him at this range. If I want to be able to put DPS onto him at this range, I'm going to have to switch to my spike, which is what I'm doing right now. But you're about to notice something. Watch his velocity. Now it didn't just drop to back down to 3,200. His velocity is dropping back down to his base speed, and he is obviously aligned. You can see he's aligned to the sun, but now he's just completely stopped. He's given up, I assume. But what I believe happened right there is, as the fight was ending and his velocity was falling, he's clearly headed towards the sun. He's aligning out. He's probably already hit his warp button. He's not pointed by me. Okay? He's not pointed. I get into point range. I point him. Okay? He's likely burnt out his micro warp drive, or he's turned it off so he could warp faster. I hit him with that micro warp drive cycle, and because he had hit warp 2 and not a line, or he had hit warp after he had hit a line and then he didn't hit a line again, his ship comes to a complete stop, because his ship had already shifted from the align to the warp. And this is similar to the delay bubbling, when you delay bubble with like a saber to make someone actually stop their ship. They hit warp, you pop the bubble, it cancels the warp, and it not only cancels the warp, but their ship comes to a standstill. So it's a great way to catch cloaky ships. It's the same thing that happened here. His whole ship stopped because he didn't keep spamming align warp, align warp, align warp, which is a good habit to have. And he goes down because I got into range and I got DPS on him, even if it was the spike DPS rather than I think the plutonium is what I usually run. So what you're going to see right here in local is him say longest warp ever. So that kind of confirms what I was thinking about him trying to warp off. It looked very, very much like he was trying to warp off, and I think that he hit the warp. He was just about to go into warp. I got the point because his micro warp drive had burnt out, or he turned it off, one of the two. And when I did that, his ship came to a stop. He didn't realize he was still stopped. He was probably sitting there spamming the warp button, not realizing what was going on, in a panic, and then he died. And unfortunately, as a result of all the heat I was having to give my ship, I've burnt out my web. So it's not a big deal. I still got the kill. But once this is all over, I will have to run back to the station and get that repaired and turned back online. That's the only Comet fight video I have for now, but I'm wanting to get back out there and fly it some more if I can ever get back over to faction warfare space. And I think it's still a really great ship, and it's not very common yet from what I've seen. So I think this ship will work really well for a while at least, until it catches on and everybody starts using it. But this and the Inyo, I think, are both really great ships.